Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be amongst you to talk about carbon trading and the World Bank. I will only make a very brief reference right in the beginning to the issue of forests and deforestation, as well as reforestation, in which the bank has played a very, very important role. Virtually all major development projects in this country in which the bank has been involved right since independence have had damaging environmental impact, especially on forests. And the bank actually, if it is to be evaluated, must be indicted very, very powerfully for actually having not only been complicit in the destruction of forests, but having in some sense planned it, drilled it, and charted a course that would lead to it. Let me just say this, that in compensation, reforestation programs of the kind designed by the bank have always been meant to exclude people. Why did it go in for eucalyptus in spite of knowing in the 60s and the 70s, in spite of knowing that eucalyptus can lower the water table, will destroy virtually everything, all other vegetation around itself, will let off toxic leaves and other residues? The answer is very simple. Because eucalyptus is not browsed by cattle and goats and sheep, so you don't have to involve people in protecting plantations. Plantations will grow on their own. The exact same argument was used for subaru. And we know the effect of these, both these kinds of reforestation programs. They led to extensive monoculture formations, destruction of biodiversity, and the creation of plantations, not forests. Plantations are not forests, let's be very clear. In some sense, this is probably the single biggest indictment that can be made of the bank in South Asia, that it's made the largest possible contribution to deforestation. Let me now turn to carbon trading. And I think it's a very important subject that's going to be with us for the coming decades, and this is one of the pivotal issues on which the environmental movement is going to have to fight governments, business, industry, and the World Bank. The reason is very simple. Let me just start by stating what the basis of the carbon trading business is all about. Put very simply, as we know, global warming is probably the single greatest menace that the world faces today, comparable in its destructive potential to a nuclear holocaust. The global warming process is now pretty well understood. We know that it's irresponsible consumption of fossil fuels and many other forms of natural resources that has caused an irreversible change. And we are now pretty close to the tipping point, after which, no matter what you do, it becomes impossible to roll back the damage. And we are very, very close to it indeed in this part of the world. And I just want to mention that the Tibetan plateau, in which 7 of the greatest rivers of Asia originate, is witnessing the greatest recession of glaciers of a kind that we have not known anywhere else in the world. It's happening rapidly, relentlessly, and some of the effects will be felt, are being felt pretty immediately, apart from, the long-term phenomenon of the rise in sea levels is going to be preceded by cycles of floods and droughts, and we are already witnessing those. Some of the most erratic climate events in the world are happening here. But now, as sort of global awareness about greenhouse gas emissions increased, there was, as you know, the Kyoto Protocol signed in 2005, which basically involved a commitment by a handful of countries, about 30 countries, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by a measly proportion of just 5.2% by the year 2008 to 2012, depending on which category the country belonged to, over the 1990 levels. Now, environmentalists have agreed that, in fact, the kind of reductions that you need from the present levels of greenhouse gas emissions are of the order of 60–80%. So you need something like 20 Kyotos to stabilize the climate and to bring it back to the sustainable levels that existed in the early years of the Industrial Revolution, right? So Kyoto is a pathetic, paltry little agreement. But even those targets are likely to prove elusive the way the industrialized countries are going about the task of reducing them. And so reluctant are businesses and governments to actually undertake radical measures to bring about these cuts in greenhouse gas emissions that they're looking for ways of actually increasing their own emissions while finding a method of trading, and that's where carbon trading comes in. So, under the Kyoto Protocol, you have something called the Clean Development Mechanism, which allows for two things. Something called joint implementation, that is, countries in the north can trade amongst themselves. Industries in the north can trade pollution quota. So every industry gets a pollution quota, a certain number of millions of tons of CO2, carbon dioxide, equivalent of greenhouse gas emissions. It is meant to reduce them by 5.2%, right? So instead of reducing them by, that proportion, it actually pays somebody, another company, which has reduced them. Okay, so company A pays company B, which is reduced, and buys its quota, as it were. This is called joint implementation. That is within the north. But between the north and the south, you have an explicit system of trading in carbon emissions. And this is the main mechanism through which we're supposed to reach a cleaner environment, a more sustainable future with lower greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this is turning into a huge business. The North-South business last year alone clocked a turnover of something like 30 billion euros, about 40 billion dollars. This year is likely to be of the order of $100 billion. Within the European Union itself, emissions trading was as high as $22 billion last year, 2006. It's likely, which was double the level in the previous year. It's growing. So what you have is a very strange phenomenon. We know that business generated pollution and greenhouse gases emissions. Now we have been told that to reduce greenhouse gases, you need to promote more business, right? There's something very strange about that. In the first place. In the second place, the whole assumption of North-South emissions quota trading is based on the explicit understanding that it costs much less in the South to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by, per ton. For instance, it's only about $1 to $4 per ton of carbon dioxide. In the South, the cost is as high as $15 to $1,000 in the North. So why not achieve this magic result, right? Get the low-cost countries to reduce their quotas, their greenhouse gas emissions, and undertake projects. Those quotas then can be bought at a fraction of the price the North would have to pay in order to reduce its own greenhouse gas emissions. Now, and the bank is very deeply involved in financing this booming trade, which is going to become one of the biggest businesses in the world, perhaps outpacing large industries such as steel production and automobiles production and so on and so forth. That's the size and the pace at which it is growing. It's a huge business.